RUSI New South Wales is an independent, apolitical, not-for-profit public education institute that, since 1888, has been promoting informed debate on and enhancing public awareness and understanding of defence and national security issues. We are Australia's oldest think tank. We conduct monthly lectures and seminars, issue a monthly newsletter, provide research support through our extensive military and historical library located in the Anzac Memorial in Sydney's Hyde Park, and together with RUSI Australia, publish a national quarterly magazine called United Service, with informed articles addressing the latest defence and security issues.
Please note, this monthly update presents the geostrategic situation as at the 10th of December, 2024. As often with these rapidly changing events, the monthly update can be out of date by the time the podcast is published. Current geostrategic issues. The past month has seen further dramatic developments in the wars in Ukraine, Gaza, Lebanon, and Syria, while conflicts elsewhere, such as in Sudan and Myanmar, have continued to bubble along. I will begin this summary with the Syrian civil war and then address the Russo-Ukrainian war, before turning the focus to the other conflicts in the Middle East. Syria. Perhaps the most surprising geostrategic event of the past month was the fall of the dynastic Assad regime in Syria, which had ruled the country autocratically, with an iron fist for 54 years. Syria had been in a state of civil war for more than 13 years since the Arab Spring uprisings of 2011 were brutally suppressed by the Assad regime, with the support of Russia, Iran and Iran's Shia proxies, the Hezbollah of Lebanon. Following the initial phase of suppression, the civil war entered a long period of stalemate, with the main centers of commerce in the regime's hands and the opposition rebels largely confined to the country's north. The main opposition groups were Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, HTS, formerly linked to al-Qaeda, in Idlib province in northwestern Syria, various Turkish-backed Syrian rebel militia, especially the so-called Syrian National Army, based along the Turkish border, and the Kurdish militia, the so-called Syrian Democratic Forces, supported by the United States and based in the northeast. There were also remnants of Islamic State in Iraq and Syria, ISIS, based in central northern Syria around Raqqa. Assad, whose Syrian army had low morale and was poorly paid, equipped and trained, was only able to hold on to power with the support of Russia and Iran. The most powerful rebel leader was the HTS leader, a Sunni who went by the nom de guerre of Abu Muhammad al-Golani, real name, Ahmed Hussein al-Shara. AA, who had slowly built up his Sunni forces in Idlib. With impeccable timing, noting that Russia was distracted by its war in Ukraine, Iran was preparing for further retaliation by Israel, and Hezbollah had been seriously weakened by its war with Israel. Al-Golani launched a surprise offensive on the 1st of December on the city of Aleppo, which fell to his forces on the 3rd of December. Al-Golani, leading his HTS fighters and other rebel forces, then pushed south along the axis of the main highway linking Aleppo to the capital, Damascus, via the cities of Hama and Homs. Hama fell to the rebels on the 4th of December, and Homs on the 6th of December. During this advance, the Syrian army provided minimal resistance, despite the close support of Russian aircraft operating from their bases on Syria's Mediterranean coast. Meanwhile, the Kurds had taken the opportunity to seize a large swathe of northeast Syria, and other rebel groups had seized strategic objectives south of Damascus around Daraa in southwest Syria. By the 8th of December, the rebels had surrounded Damascus, and Syrian army generals announced that Bashar al-Assad had fled into exile. The Syrian Prime Minister offered to continue administering the country so as to enable an orderly transition to a new regime. At a meeting with him in Damascus on the 10th of December, the leading rebel commander, Ahmed Hussein al-Shara, as he now prefers to be known, prepared to take over the government. How other rebel groups will react to this is yet to be seen. Foreign powers, too, were quick to take advantage of the chaos. Turkey was understood to be strengthening its grip on northern Syria by 9 to the 10th of December. At the same time, Israel occupied Israel-Syria buffer zone along the Golan Heights ceasefire line, claimed it had destroyed the Syrian navy, and carried out a series of heavy airstrikes across Syria, bombing some 100 military airfields, air defense systems and strategic weapon stockpiles, including chemical weapons caches, ostensibly to prevent them from falling into the hands of extremists. Israel denied that its ground forces were advancing on the capital, Damascus. Concurrently, the United States bombed known ISIS facilities in central Syria ostensibly to prevent ISIS from taking advantage of the chaos. Assad had only been able to hold onto power with the support of Russia and Iran, who are likely to be the major geostrategic losers of Assad's overthrow. Russia may lose access to its Mediterranean port and air bases on Syria's Mediterranean coast. Iran will lose influence across a wide swathe of the Middle East, as its so-called Axis of Resistance, the coalition of Iranian-supported militias and political organizations which surrounded Israel, is now reduced to a few unlinked pockets of resistance. Turkey may become the main winner. It is reported that HTS and its partners flagged their plans with Turkey and received tacit approval of them some 6 months before launching the 1st of December offensive. Turkey is likely to have considerable influence over the new regime in Damascus. It is understood that President Bashar al-Assad's wife, Asma, and the couple's children fled to Russia and were granted asylum in the first week of December, and that Bashar's brothers fled to the United Arab Emirates. Bashar al-Assad, himself, fled the capital, Damascus, by air when the rebels had it surrounded on the 8th of December. On the 10th of December, it emerged that he had been granted asylum in Moscow. This map, prepared by the Institute for the Study of War, ISW, shows who controlled what territory in Syria, as at the 9th of December. The white area in the southwest of Syria is the Golan Heights. Russo-Ukrainian War. The principal development of geostrategic import affecting the war in Ukraine over the past month has been Donald J. Trump's decisive victory in the United States presidential elections on the 5th of November. With both Russia and Ukraine nearly exhausted after nigh on 3 years, 33 months, of high-end warfare, the focus of each side has been on improving its negotiating position for the peace talks which must now follow. Ukraine's Kursk offensive. You will recall that, on the 6th of August, Ukraine launched a successful cross-border incursion from Sumy Oblast in Ukraine's northeast into Kursk Oblast in Russia's southwest, catching Russia by surprise. By the time the offensive culminated in September, Ukraine claimed to have pushed 28 to 35 kilometers into Kursk Oblast on a front at least 40 kilometers wide, and to have captured some 1,263 square kilometers of Russian territory, including 93 settlements. Other estimates put the area seized at closer to 800 square kilometers. President Volodymyr Zelensky said the Kursk operation was intended to create a buffer zone at the border to prevent further Russian attacks across the border into Sumy Oblast. The Kremlin, though, suspected that Zelensky would seek to use the Kursk salient as a bargaining chip in any negotiations, say to exchange Kursk for Crimea. To obviate this, President Vladimir Putin is now attempting to drive the Ukrainian forces out of Kursk Oblast and has assembled a force of 30,000 troops, including some 10,000 North Koreans, to do so. The Russian-Korean force initially managed to reduce the size of the Ukrainian salient by some 325 square kilometers in October-November, but, despite heavy fighting, have made little further progress in the last week or two. The maps, prepared by the Institute for the Study of War, ISW, shows who controlled what territory in Russia's Kursk Oblast as at the 10th of December. Russia's Donbass and Zaporizhia offensives. It is a different story in the Donbass, especially in Donetsk Oblast, where intense fighting has continued and Russian forces have been making slow but steady territorial gains. They have resumed their advance towards Toretsk, Kurakov, west of Donetsk city, south of Pokrovsk, and further south, in the vicinity of Vuhledar, which fell to the Russians on the 1st of October. Further north, they have consolidated their positions on the eastern bank of the Oskil River. By the 10th of December, however, the key objectives on the north-south line west of Bakhmut, namely Chasiv and Toretsk, and further west, Pokrovsk and Kurakov, still remained in Ukrainian hands. Russian forces, though, were making tactical gains south of Pokrovsk, as they attacked into Ukrainian weak points and attempted a turning maneuver to directly assault Pokrovsk from the south. In southern Ukraine, Russian forces continued offensive operations in western Zaporizhia Oblast north of Robotyne, where they have made slow but steady progress towards the Dnipro River and Zaporizhia city without seizing any operationally significant objectives. The map prepared by the Institute for the Study of War, ISW, shows who controlled what territory in Ukraine as at the 10th of December. Manpower constraints. Russia's incremental tactical gains, however, have come at great cost in personnel and equipment. If anything, the fighting in Donetsk Oblast has been more intense in November than it was in October, which up to that time had been the deadliest month for the Russians since the February 2022 invasion, with an estimated 41,980 killed or wounded. Most were victims of the Russian tactics of mass frontal assaults under Ukrainian drone surveillance. According to British Ministry of Defence, in November the daily average Russian casualty rate exceeded 1,500, and for the first time in the war, over 2,000 Russian casualties were reported on a single day, the 28th of November. Indeed, November supplanted October as the deadliest month for Russia since the war began, with a total of 45,860 casualties. Ukraine, too, is facing manpower issues. President Zelensky confirmed on the 8th of December that more than 400,000 Ukrainian soldiers had been killed or injured since the war began, of whom 43,000 had been killed in action, and 370,000 wounded, some of whom later returned to the battlefield. He has rejected President Biden's recommendation that the conscription age in Ukraine be lowered from 25 to 18, but these manpower challenges point to the need for peace negotiations sooner rather than later. Harassing civil society. Meanwhile, Russia has continued harassing missile and drone strikes on Ukrainian cities and key infrastructure, such as the energy grid and ports, exploiting Ukraine's degraded air defense umbrella. To a lesser extent, Ukraine has responded in kind. A frightening new development, however, has been the use by Russia of FPV drones to terrorize the citizens of Kherson. It is reported that Kherson civilians have been, since midsummer, the target of an experiment without precedent in modern European warfare, a concerted Russian campaign to empty a city by stalking its residents with attack drones. The killer machines, sometimes by the swarm, hover above homes, buzz into buildings and chase people down streets in their cars, riding bicycles or simply on foot. The targets are not soldiers or tanks, but civilian life. Negotiating positions. Australian defence analyst, retired Major General Mick Ryan, says that Putin is sprinting to the inauguration of Donald Trump, hoping to capture as much of Ukraine as he can, and more importantly, solidify in the minds of Trump and his advisers the idea that Russian victory is inevitable. During the U.S. presidential election campaign, Donald Trump suggested that Ukraine may have to cede some of its land to Russia to make a peace deal. On the 30th of November, Volodymyr Zelensky said for the first time he would be willing to cede territory to Russia to end the war in exchange for NATO membership. Then, at the official reopening of the Cathédrale Notre-Dame de Paris on the 7th of December, which was attended by both Trump and Zelensky, Trump confirmed that, once he took office, he intended to end United States war funding for Ukraine. If Trump followed through with his funding threat, Ukraine, unable to sustain its campaign without U.S. support, would have to sue for peace. On the 10th of December, Putin announced that he would continue the war until he achieved all of his objectives, whether through negotiations or by fighting. Other conflicts in the Middle East. The 7th of October, 2024, was the first anniversary of the Hamas hit-and-run raids on Israeli towns and villages near the Gaza border, which initiated the current round of ongoing conflicts in the Middle East. Hamas, the fundamentalist Sunni Islamic organization that governs Gaza, launched a number of coordinated raids on southern Israel on the 7th of October, 2023. Employing the tactics and tools of terrorism, the raiders killed some 1,200 Israelis, mostly civilians, and then withdrew, taking about 250 hostages back into Gaza, about 100 of whom remain in captivity. This has led to conflict in Gaza, on the West Bank, on the Lebanon-Israel border, in Iraq and Syria, in the Red Sea, and in Iran. After a year of fighting in Gaza, the Israeli Defense Forces, IDF, have now broken up and either destroyed or dispersed the main Hamas fighting units, and have occupied the whole of the Gaza Strip. Asymmetric urban guerrilla warfare between the IDF and Hamas, and other Palestinian militias in Gaza such as the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, continues apace there, and could be sustained by both sides indefinitely unless a negotiated settlement emerges. Given this situation, the Israeli political leadership felt confident enough in September to launch a new phase of the war. Israel's then Defense Minister, Yoav Gallant, announced on the 30th of September that the IDF focus would now be on Hezbollah in Lebanon. Hence, the international focus shifted from Gaza to Lebanon. During October and early November, the conflicts in the Middle East between Israel and Iran's proxies, primarily Hamas, Hezbollah and the Houthis, was characterized, inter alia, by Israel's intensified aerial and ground campaign in northern Gaza to prevent Hamas regrouping there. Israel's intensified aerial and ground campaign in Lebanon focused mainly in the south, Beirut and the Bekaa Valley, to destroy Hezbollah infrastructure, especially tunnel systems and logistic stores, to destroy Hezbollah's banking system, and to drive Hezbollah fighters north of the Litani River, and Hezbollah's continued rocket, missile and drone attacks on northern and central Israel. Meanwhile, the Gaza peace negotiations had continued. A senior Hamas official announced that the militant group was ready to stop fighting in Gaza if Israel committed to a ceasefire, but with Israel's escalation of the war in Lebanon, no further progress was made and the two sides remained far from agreement. Over the past month, November-early December, the most geostrategically significant development was a ceasefire agreement between Israel and Lebanon. In Gaza and on the West Bank, Israel has continued its operations to destroy Hamas remnants in the Gaza Strip and suppress opposition to its settlement expansion on the West Bank. It has ignored calls by the United Nations General Assembly to conclude its operations in Gaza and on the West Bank without further delay. Israel-Lebanon ceasefire agreement. By mid-November, it was evident that Israel had dealt a crippling blow to Hezbollah, neutralizing much of its leadership and destroying much of its extensive rocket arsenal, as well as some of its defense networks and tunnel systems in southern Lebanon. Hezbollah announced that it had abandoned its earlier precondition for peace talks, namely that a permanent ceasefire in Gaza must come into effect first. It was now ready to negotiate a truce with Israel. On the 27th of November, a ceasefire agreement was signed by Israel, Lebanon and several mediating countries, including France and the United States. The agreement mandates a 60-day halt to hostilities, during which Israel must withdraw its forces from southern Lebanon and Hezbollah must withdraw its forces to north of the Litani River. A 5-country monitoring panel, led by the United States, will oversee the implementation, with 5,000 Lebanese troops deployed in a buffer zone between the Israel-Lebanon border and the Litani River to ensure compliance. The agreement does not preclude either Israel or Lebanon from acting in self-defense, but Israeli and Lebanese officials disagreed on what that entails. Since the ceasefire came into effect, it has had a somewhat shaky start, but overall it seems to be holding, despite Lebanon claiming that Israel has repeatedly violated the pact. So far, the 3rd of December has been the deadliest day since the ceasefire agreement was signed. Israel claimed that Hezbollah operatives had infiltrated into the buffer zone north of the border and it bombed and shelled several targets in retaliation. 3 Lebanese civilians were killed. Israel warned that, if the truce collapsed, its attacks would go deeper into Lebanon and target the Lebanese state itself. The United States is among those charged with monitoring the agreement. On the 11th of December, a top U.S. military officer visited Beirut to monitor the withdrawal of the first Israeli troops from Lebanon. He confirmed that Israel had withdrawn its forces from the town of Al-Qiyam in South Lebanon. Gaza Strip. Over the past month, Israel has continued its operations to suppress the remnants of Hamas and other rebel groups in the Gaza Strip, usually preceding ground operations with heavy air and artillery bombardments. The principal focus has again been northern Gaza, particularly the long-standing refugee camps, but operations also have continued in central and southern Gaza. For example, on the 8th of October-December, the Israel Defense Forces, IDF, 162nd Division undertook clearing operations in Jabalia refugee camp, northern Gaza. During this operation, the division killed Palestinian fighters, destroyed militia infrastructure, and demolished buildings. The division was supported by the IDF Air Force, which, on the 9th of December, struck and killed 10 Palestinian militia fighters responsible for an anti-tank missile attack, which killed 3 soldiers and injured 18 others of the division's 84th Infantry Brigade. Also on the 10th of December, the Mujahideen Brigade's mortared an IDF site east of the Netzarim Corridor, a strip of land just south of Gaza City which separates northern Gaza from central and southern Gaza, while the IDF continued operations in the central Gaza Strip with shooting reported north of Nusayrat refugee camp, east of Al-Maghazi refugee camp, and east of Deir al-Bala. In the south, the IDF 143rd Division continued clearing operations near Rafah City and demolished buildings southeast of Rafah City. The humanitarian situation has not improved over the past month. The risk of famine in the Gaza Strip has not eased. As at the 10th of December, Gazan health authorities put the death toll since the war began at just over 44,800. More than 106,300 have been injured. The map, prepared by the Institute for the Study of War, ISW, shows the reported Israeli ground operations in the Gaza Strip on the 10th of December. West Bank. Over the past month, there have been 2 sources of tension on the West Bank: IDF operations to suppress opposition to Israel's settlement expansion and to maintain law and order on the West Bank, and actions by the Palestinian Authority to re-establish its authority as the government of the West Bank. As to the Israeli government's settlement expansion plans, the tensions so created have largely been expressed in ongoing clashes between settlers and mainly Palestinian youths as opportunities arise, with each side initiating the clashes from time to time. The IDF has had to intervene to restore order, frequently taking the settler side in so doing. As to the Palestinian Authority, PA, conscious of the need to re-establish its credibility as a possible government for the Palestinian territories once the war in Gaza ends, the PA has increased the use of its security forces to maintain order within the areas under its control on the West Bank. Hamas, however, still sees itself as returning to power and encourages its supporters on the West Bank to harass the PA security forces. For example, on the 9th of October-December, Palestinian fighters engaged PA security forces in Nablus and Tulkarm. The clashes reportedly began after a gunman fired a small arm at a PA security forces headquarters in Tulkarm. These clashes follow days of protests in Jenin after PA security forces killed a Hamas operative. Hamas had called on all Palestinian people to stop the PA from arresting Palestinian fighters and to take a firm stance against the PA actions. The PA operation in Jenin refugee camp is notable because it is the first PA operation there in several years. Sudan. Sudan is a country of 50 million people and a civil war there, which has been ongoing for 20 months, since the 15th of April, 2023, has created a humanitarian crisis on a scale exceeding those in Ukraine and Gaza. The civil war is between rival factions in the Sudanese military government, the Sudanese Armed Forces, SAF, under General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, and the Paramilitary Rapid Support Forces, RSF, under Mohamed Hamdan Dagalo, aka Hemedti. Most fighting has been concentrated around the capital, Khartoum, and in the Darfur region in the country's west. Starting in October 2023, the momentum began to swing towards the RSF, which defeated SAF forces in Darfur and made gains in Khartoum State, Kordofan in central Sudan, and Jazeera State. Momentum, however, swung back to the SAF in February 2024, when the SAF made gains in Omdurman, a city across the Nile from Khartoum that forms part of Sudan's wider capital. Since April, intense fighting has focused on three regions: North Darfur, where more than 40 villages have been burned and civilians trapped with no safety or food; in El Fasher, in Kordofan in central Sudan, which the RSF now largely controls, and around Khartoum and along the Blue and White Niles, where the RSF also appears to have the upper hand. In June, the RSF also made gains in Sennar State. By early July, the RSF had the upper hand in Darfur and Khartoum, with the SAF operating from Port Sudan on the Red Sea coast and seeking to challenge the RSF in its strongholds. By September, the SAF had made notable gains in Khartoum and Khartoum North. In September and early October, the SAF, which enjoys air superiority, began a bombing campaign targeting towns controlled by the RSF preparatory to ground assaults. As of the 10th of November, the main focus of this campaign remained the Sudanese capital, Khartoum. The fighting intensified in late November and early December in North Darfur and Khartoum Omdurman. On the 9th of December, there was an air attack on a busy market in Kabkabia, a town about 180 kilometers west of North Darfur's capital, El Fasher. Kabkabia is currently surrounded by the RSF. The airstrike killed more than 100 people and wounded hundreds, including women and children. The SAF insisted that it had the right to target any location used by the RSF for military purposes. On the 10th of December, the RSF aimed heavy artillery fire at an SAF-controlled sector of Omdurman. At least 65 people were killed and hundreds wounded. Humanitarian situation. As to the humanitarian situation, on the 2nd of May, a U.S. Senate hearing estimated that the death toll in this civil war could be as high as 150,000. According to a November report by researchers in Britain and Sudan, more than 61,000 people died in Khartoum state alone during the first 14 months of the war, i.e., before the current SAF campaign in Khartoum began. The new evidence suggests the toll from the devastating conflict is significantly higher than previously recorded. The estimate includes some 26,000 people who suffered violent deaths, a higher figure than one currently used by the United Nations for the entire country. As of the 5th of July, some 7.7 million people had been internally displaced, more than 2.1 million had fled the country as refugees, and perhaps up to 25 million, half the population, were facing starvation. The UN World Food Programme considers this to be the world's largest hunger crisis. More than half the population is experiencing crisis levels of hunger. Multiple areas are at risk of famine, and on the 1st of August famine was confirmed in a camp sheltering hundreds of thousands of displaced people in North Darfur.
Geostrategic Update was produced by David Leese, Chair of the RUSI New South Wales Special Interest Group on Strategy. The SIG Strategy Group seeks to enhance knowledge of strategy, including the evolution of strategic thought, maintain awareness of current geostrategic issues, and undertake research on nominated issues of current strategic interest.